to Design Meets. My name is Ian Chalmers, and I am the founder of Design Meets and Pivot Design in Toronto. And before we get started, I'd like to just have a land acknowledgement. As an important step towards reconciliation and as a member of Canadian society, we are all treaty people, and this acknowledgement is for the traditional lands Design Meets and Pivot Design Studio occupies. We are appreciative and grateful for these lands and have respect towards recognition of Indigenous peoples, practices, and ways of knowing. Since 2010, we started this. It's been a while, but this idea came from a need to gather amongst other like-minded design people as a community at the end of the day, in person, without social distancing, without masks, all those things we're used to now, to exchange ideas, get inspired, collaborate, find meaningful ways to utilize design as a way to transform. One of our last Design Meets event was on climate action. This was pre-pandemic, February 2020. We didn't really know what was coming at this point. We gathered at Sidewalk Labs in the winter and had a great conversation about what we can do around climate action. This past March 2021, we had a follow-up, which was a remote version of climate action with some of our speakers to talk about what we've learned over the pandemic experience. What could be applied from that experience, and what do we need to do to take action as a design community. So here we are in June. It's been a long haul for all of us. Many of us left our workplaces back in March 2020 when we began to shift to more isolated working, learning from home model. We've navigated through this global pandemic, social injustice, unpredictability, a change in how we live and how we work, and we all have had to suffer and experience heightened levels of anxiety, stress, and depression. For those of us in the design space, it's fair to say that this has been a bit of a struggle, both emotionally and creatively. When this pandemic is finally behind us, we'd expect there will be changes in our return to work, our return to learn, to be educated, and how do we find a balance between hybrid and virtual experiences? Our individual, our team creativity, our collaboration, our co-design, how will that play out? Our health, our mental well-being, how do we reconnect with one another again? Designing with our ecology in mind, reducing emissions and moving more towards circularity. Designing and advocating for equity, diversity, and social justice. Also finding balance in the use of our technologies and what we're sitting in front of right now, the emergence of this, and how we will collaborate in the next six months to 12 months with work in person and virtual. And changes in mobility, how we move, how we get around on foot, bike, transit. How will that be different? How will it be the same? And lastly, how will we greet one another? The handshake, will we still do the handshake? Elbows, I really like elbows. That's a great way. This is from NPR, and this was way before the pandemic, talking about flu. So no one had flu this year. That was the good news. So anyway, all joking aside, how will we greet one another? Maybe we're going to hug each other. That just might be the outcome of this. So what do those next 6 to 12 months look like for creatives, for designers, the design practice, the workplace, physical, virtual, hybrid? And what emergent conclusions can we draw from this past year and take into the next? We hear constant talk about back to normal, return to business as usual. The truth is, it feels like we're past normal. So the question becomes, how do we design for the new routine? So we're going to talk about this today with our speakers. So I'd like to welcome our speakers. We're very grateful to have Dominique Ursal. Dom has over 20 years of experience as a UX consultant. He is the co-founder of Different, professor of user experience in the digital transformation at the University of Ottawa, and has delivered projects for innovative startups and multinationals, municipalities, regional, and federal governments. Dom is keeping busy working from home with 3 kids under the age of 5. Wow, and 2 of them are twins. Imagine that. I'd like to welcome Irene Chong. Irene is a design strategist and educator. Her interests lie at the intersection of design, innovation, business, and social impact. She holds a Master of Design from the Institute of Design, Illinois Institute of Technology, and an MBA from the Stewart School of Business. She's currently a professor of design at Seneca. Irene is an amateur gardener and sailing enthusiast, I'm told, and she's actually taking this call from her boat in the middle of Lake Ontario. And wouldn't that be great? Dan Sellers, welcome Dan. Dan is the head of business design and user experience enterprise strategy lab at EPAM New York. Dan has worked as a multidisciplinary design strategist with firms like Scholastic, MasterCard, Reuters, Goldman Sachs, to name a few. Dan is an avid cyclist and classic cinema watcher, something he has combined during the lockdown. The question is, Dan, where do you put the popcorn? Robin Yoshida, please welcome Robin. Robin is a designer, educator, facilitator, and consultant, creative strategist, and advocate for exploring to improve. He teaches an interdisciplinary course called Think Tank at Ontario College of Art and Design. And Robin's guiding question is, what's more important, the problem you see or the problem you don't see? More on this later, I guarantee you. So let's get started. We're going to ask our panelists each a series of questions. And during that, you might have some questions of your own. Please feel free to put them in the webinar Q&A area, and we'll respond to them once we sort of get past the 30-minute mark. So we're going to open this up and start with Dom. All right, Dom, putting you on the spot here.
Here we go.
Why not, right? So you started your new business, your new design business, Different, and that is spelled differently. It's DFFRNT. During the pandemic. Tell us about what this was like. What did you learn that was unexpected? Do you think post-pandemic future will be different?
I see what you did there.
Anyway, over to you, Dom.
That's a great question. Thanks, Ian. I think starting the business during the pandemic was it was a unique experience. We had been planning the launch for April 1st, 2020, and we'd been planning that for several months, and we went into lockdown just a few weeks before that. And so our question was, well, do we postpone it? We don't know how long the pandemic is going to last, or do we go ahead? And one of the major factors in the decision to go ahead was the fact that the pandemic was forcing transformation on a lot of businesses. And as a strategic design firm that aims to leverage the design research and design methodologies in terms of solving bigger business problems, we thought that there's going to be a lot of those types of problems to solve in the coming future. And I think we made the right decision. We're here a little bit over a year later, and just the launch of the business itself was different because we were responding to a fluid situation. People didn't know what to do. People were being sent home. We were able to have a lot of really good conversations that we wouldn't necessarily have had otherwise, in terms of clients and collaborators, et cetera. But I think it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. Now, in terms of some of the things that I didn't expect how intentional we would have to be with our communication, with our collaboration, with our team building. There are people on our team that I have yet, a year and a bit later, to see face to face, to be in the same physical space with. And so we can't be dependent on those organic ways of crossing paths and collaborating and building relationships. We have to be a little bit more intentional about that, which is something that you might know academically, but once the rubber hits the road and you actually have to start doing it, it's a very different experience.
That's great. The fluidity and transformational aspect is, in many ways, we as designers typically are well situated for that kind of thinking. It's just putting it into practice that is the challenge.
Absolutely.
Congratulations on that startup. So
thank you.
Dan, on the other end of things, I mean, we've talking about Dom, and Dom has certainly worked with large scale government and organizations, but you work within the very large enterprise, and you're sort of running it, the design business in this enterprise, working with remote teams, doing a lot of collaboration. How would you describe the experience, and sort of what were some of the things that you didn't expect? And this is a big question. And what are you anticipating your post-pandemic future will be like?
Yeah, so let's sort of take a step back and sort of look at how I've tried to sort of build a culture inside of strategic design teams. I think the notion of culture, of belonging, of being able to come to work to learn from your peers is really important. It's a really important aspect of why I choose to go work some tough problems inside of financial services or life sciences and so forth. And so what I'm really passionate about is fostering a kind of space environment, or a safe environment that will allow people to do their best work. And so largely what the pandemic and the going remote has done is it's pushed us all apart. So those spaces that I would build either for clients or for our teams, project rooms and so forth, have all gone virtual. The days when I would just get on a plane and go see somebody because I needed to see them face to face have gone away. And so what I've learned is that I have to kind of slow down that process and still follow tried and true methods of reaching people and making sure that my teams are kind of using a 2x2 growth model. So what I mean by that is, and it's the work of Carol Dwight out of Stanford, and it's the growth model is something that I'm very passionate about, and it's really about mindset and a growth mindset. And going 2x2 means that what I'm always trying to do is pair people up, so that no matter what project that we're doing, I'm always finding pairings. And for a company like EPAM, 37,000 people around the world, pairings most likely is going to be different time zones, and skill sets and maturity levels are going to be very different. But I find that there is unique chemistry of bringing people together and pairing people up. So that's how we're coping, and it's been it's something that we fostered when we were in person, and now we're continuing to foster it remote. I was also going to say that, one of the challenges, and I think this is a really important for all people on the call listening to us, is, do you self-recognize or self-identify as being an introvert or an extrovert? Because as someone who suffered from being the introvert for so long and sort of overcoming that fear of, am I going to look stupid? Does this sound right? Will I make a fool of myself? Part of what I'm doing is acknowledging that there are different personality mixes in the play inside of organizations, and we have to figure out kind of how to sort of nurture out. And some of the exercises that I've sort of done over the years at sort of doing that has been again creating those safe spaces where it's okay to be able to kind of share what you've been doing for the last 20 hours by a quick 2-minute video. Putting together what you've just done over the last 20 hours may only take you 5 or 10 minutes, but I can teach you video editing, some After Effects work and so forth. And you can actually have a lot of fun at showing your other team members what the last 20 or 40 hours worth of user research looks like. I can give you the highlights reel of what we as a team have just been doing. Now, what that does is it takes the pressure from you having to do a performance. You can just hit play, and this thing takes care of it. You can spend 4 hours building a beautiful video. But the point is that, by de-risking that moment of when I have to present can often help people. And I think, that's a kind of useful technique for, if I don't see you or I don't see some of my team members and they're going to want to catch up, what are the means with which I can help you to sort of uncover some of the work that we've been doing and and allow the insights and some of the creativity to kind of happen from that.
Fabulous. That's really interesting. And I think that's it's a great segue for and not that that's the question for Irene, but definitely in education, the introvert extrovert aspect definitely comes up. But maybe we'll come back to that one. Thanks, Dan. Irene, as a design educator, and you'll relate to what Dan was talking about there, you're working directly with the next generation of designers and creatives who are going to enter the workforce. And I know that they must have many questions. How are they feeling about what's ahead for them sort of in the post-COVID world? Do you think it's going to be easier or harder for them? And are they prepared?
Great question, Ian. I think not my students, because they're in their last semester, they're on the cusp of graduation, they naturally all are anxious about the future, regardless of pandemic or not. They already were in that mind frame because they're trying to finish up that course. A lot of them are really just desperate to get out. They've been in school for several years. They want to move on with their lives. They can almost see the light at the end of the tunnel, but they're also worrying about what next, right? So I think naturally those anxieties are still there, but they've perhaps taken a bit of a different shape and form. And I think while we're still in this learning process, living through the pandemic, I think there's a role, not just for the students to play, but actually industries and like academics, like anyone who has a potential influence in their lives, right? And what I mean by that is that students, let's say one of their natural pain points is, oh, I don't know how to find a job, or I don't know how to meet people, or I'm struggling to make those connections, or entry-level jobs are just so hard to find. People want X number of years of experience and I'm just coming straight out of the door. I just can't get my foot in the door. So they already have those barriers. But on top of that, I think in the remote world, we're all trying to learn these skills of like, how do I meet with people? They're starting at a sort of, they're still at an early stage in their careers where they're developing those skills. And so being naturally, I think designers, my observation has it does naturally draw in a lot of introvert types of personalities. So there is a lot of, I think, fear. And one of the fear in particularly, I think their own voices at that stage in their lives. And so what I've found is that I find myself having to take a lot more effort to perhaps like coach them and support them in those softer skills and those softer areas of saying, okay, well, how does this work that you do translate to real life? What does it mean, if I ask you for your opinion for something, or how can you defend your design work? And then also connecting that, how does that work in the real life if you were to try to find a job or you need to meet with an employer, right? And in the online world, because your presence is demonstrated differently, it does, there are pros and cons to it. I thought in the online world, perhaps it might naturally be more conducive to shy people because they can express themselves in different ways. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but some of them are really shy and will just completely hide behind the camera. I haven't found the magic recipe for what it is to, get them more comfortable. But I think it's, to Dan's point, a lot about the culture building. So I find myself a lot more conscious of that, helping to build that safe space. Always have, maybe it's harder in the large classroom because I only meet with them in the bigger class, in the main classroom, but I do lots of breakout sessions. So they work with their smaller teams, right? And encourage them for those small behaviors that they can help. It can translate well later. I say, well, if you want to keep your camera off in the big room, in the main room, it's nice to have a little bit more connection with your immediate 4-member, your teammates. So try to have that connection and maybe see them or, say hello to them, have those check-ins. So those are the sort of softer skills that I try to convey to them so that hopefully it translates when they're going out to the real world, finding jobs. But I think there is, so the way I see it is that it's both trying to teach them from a person who has some influence in their lives, but I think it's also important for industry as well to be conscious of like, what role can I play? You can put some accountability on them to step up to the plate, but we also have to play a role to help coax them and coach them as we're all adapting to these new rules of engagement online because they didn't even know the rules of engagement in person in the first place. So there's new rules for them to learn.
Great point.
Can I
Very
just
interesting.
jump in there, Ian? I think that's
Please,
a great
please.
point. Both Dan and Irene have made, that the rules are changing, the social norms, the mores, what's acceptable, what's rude, what's polite, all of those things are in flux. You know, keeping your camera on versus off, how to be engaged with people, those types of things are, we're actually forging that path right now. And one of the things that I am very intentional about in my interaction with our designers and our clients and other people is that this is a situation where we are figuring it out as we go along. So there's going to be a lot of things that happen that are unexpected, that are unpredictable. I'm surprised one of my naked kids hasn't run in the room yet, but you know, those types of things happen, and we have to be gracious with each other, and I think that's something that both Dan and Irene have mentioned that I'd like to echo.
Great point. Excellent. Robin, you're also an educator and but also a consultant working in the creative and design space.
Yep.
You know, you can relate to this, obviously, this conversation, and you know, what do you see ahead in this world? And as Dom touched upon, even with respect to culture, and Dan probably touched on culture too. You know, what might we design in this remote world, of this hybrid world? How do we recreate that culture?
Okay, so
Yeah.
I mean, you know, three things that really come up for me from the others is that the phrase, you know, the fact is we've been pushed apart, you know, in a lot of ways, coming from Dan. I love Dom's position on intentionality and Irene's comment on culture space. This is a cultural dilemma, you know, and I think, you know, and businesses and education have always had these problems, right? We're on this trajectory of having to deal with the culture space, as Irene called it, right? And my problem right now, I can't be predictive, to be honest, because it's a really messy space. I mean, there's lots of things going on. We each have our own objectives and interests and contexts, personalities, whatever we desire in terms of culture, right? So what I thought I'd do, you know, in response to a question that you posed to me, I thought what I'd do is just present a tool, okay? Sort of an organizing tool, I suppose, that might help anchor what may be going on here, okay? So if I prepared a couple of slides, and let me just throw this out there, okay? And you may relate, you may not. So this is an example of what's called optimized flocking, okay? Gabor Vasarely and his associates developed some autonomous drones, right? So these are self-organizing drones that can create this pattern. And we're basically looking at the light tracings, the light trailings of those drones. And if you notice, they're not exactly the same. They're all kind of working independently. So the patterns they're creating are kind of different, right? They have these sort of little anomalies and things. The other thing is that they're all flying in the same direction, roughly, you know, but at the same time, and that's why you see a pattern. And the last thing to note is that no single drone went flying off toward the moon. They stayed within this collective environment, right? And these are independent acts on the part of independent drones, self-organizing in this space, okay? So obviously this is a simulation of a murmuration, okay? Now, instead of 20 drones, this is thousands of starlings, okay? And what's interesting is, regardless of the scale and regardless of the fact that, you know, in one case, we're talking about something digital, in the other case, something natural, we're talking about something that involves steering behaviors, okay? Of which, you know, there have been 3 identified, okay? First, let's talk about what's really going on here. The Starling each individual starling, in this case, is staying far enough away from 7 starlings around it in order not to bump into each other, right? They're also flying roughly in the same direction because they're following the average direction of the birds around it, right? And lastly, they're staying close enough in order to remain secure, right? Because this is literally a survival tactic to remain in the group, okay? So it struck me that these qualities are kind of interesting, these characteristics, and that these steering drives can be applied to an organization, right? And maybe we can use them as sort of anchors in order to determine where we're weak and where we're strong as an organization or as a school, okay? So let's go to the next slide. So let's think about it in terms of, the workplace and how it might change. The 3 things we've been talking about are these drives, these steering drives: separation, alignment, and cohesion, okay? And it strikes me, I mean, you can take a look at an entire organization using these categories. For example, a separation could refer to the autonomy of the individual employee, right? And to what degree they feel responsible for what it is they do, and how much do they get satisfaction out of that responsibility, and so on, right? So how independent are they, right? Because we need that, right? And how aligned are they, on the other hand? Do they work along with the flow of the process? Are they aligned with the strategic goal of the company, right? This type of stuff, right? And then in terms of cohesion, why are they staying? Right? Why do they want to stay? What is the reason you're giving them to stay, right? So these are things, I mean, you could go on and fill out these categories and sort of get a feel for where it is the organization is weak or strong, or where you want it to go, I think. It just strikes me as a way to sort of anchor some of this stuff. So to come back to the topic of the workplace, and as Dan pointed out, we're being pushed apart, right? So this is literally sort of a physical separation that's going on. My suggestion would be automatically to address alignment and cohesion, and in some way accommodate the fact that this space is being created, that this distance is being created. So how do you keep things together? Okay, now that could be something that's tangible or something that's intangible, right? And I think in all these cases, the thing we're worst at are the intangibles, right? Those could be some of the things that have been described, right? And the thing I like about Dom is he's talking about the intentionality behind this, right? So what I'm offering here is a tool to maybe identify the things to be intentional about, right? And in terms of the solutions, consider the tangibles and the intangibles. And some of these have been mentioned, right? In terms of responses to the spaces created, right? And so this is my offering today: separation, alignment, and cohesion. And I don't know, I hope it helps.
That's great. Does anybody want to, I'm not sure if anybody wants to comment on that, because there is so much, we're so unaware right now of where, for us anyway, north of the border. Dan, it may be different in New York, but no one really knows what, we even talk about September, and yes, schools could be back, so forth, but it'll be different. Work is going to be back. The space of work is going to be back, but we're still not clear what that means. It feels like there is a real darkness, not darkness in a negative way, but a sort of we don't know, right? So, Robin talking about the space, we can fill the space in. I'm not sure if anyone has a comment on that. Or not, that might be too open.
I mean, I think certainly, Ian, I was going to comment that, I've been going back into the office in New York. I have spent, a long time away in the countryside of Pennsylvania, and I have been, really kind of wanting to be back in the city, because I think culture plays such a part of the last 20 years living in New York, and always just being kind of around things changing and adapting and learning. And I've been sort of drawn upon, how just walking around and seeing that visibly kind of draws you in. And so, going back into an empty office has been a challenge, but I've viewed going into the office, that journey in, going out at lunchtime again on my own, as an important building block of reestablishing what that new normal might be like, and where it's going to be appropriate to lead an outdoor workshop or an indoor workshop, or be able to sort of start making kind of weekly meetings and create new rituals that are going to have to adapt. And I've noticed many of my clients ringing me saying, we'd love you to come and do a outdoor workshop with us. Can we meet for a drink and do it over a drink? So, the natural tendency is, what that meant was that connecting together was a big part of how we do work together, and doing it outdoors, doing it indoors with, kind of safety protocol in mind, is to me, feels like a new behavior that we have to relearn again, and again, find out what is appropriate, how far can we push that. I'm hoping to get over to London in the summer and start to see how they're doing there. Because what I've noticed about working in an international company is the norms are different in cities and countries, but there's a commonality to the common ethos of the firm, and you sort of lean on that common ethos, and then you sort of localize as you become, sort of embedded with a particular team or a particular area.
Yeah, if I could say something.
Yeah, Robin, go ahead.
Yeah, it sounds like everybody's talking about, to some extent anyway, protocols, right? What are the protocols? I mean, if you think about a meeting you might have just had or something this past week, where your company meeting is sort of getting off the rails, or there are disagreements and things like that. What is the protocol to your meetings in the first place? Now, this problem existed before. It's exacerbated now. But I mean, it's great that, we're having to look at it, right? We're having to consider exactly, well, what are the rules we're going to play by in our company in terms of meetings, so that, I mean, the figures on how disgusted people are with meetings are really bad, right? People just don't want to be there. Okay, so there's the challenge. Make it something they want to do. But in order to do that, you really do have to think about the structure, and then have everybody playing the same game, at least, so that you can have disagreements. You've got space for, creative thinking or whatever. And I think, protocols are, critical. They've always been critical. And I wouldn't have a job if people were good at it. So, it's always been an issue.
I would like to raise my hand.
Yeah.
So early in my career, I had the fortunate kind of experience of working inside of a chip manufacturer. It was Intel in Oregon, and their facilities are so big that you could actually do walking meetings around the whole campus. And my line manager every week would do a walking meeting for 45 minutes. We would do close to 1.5 miles. And over the course of 45 minutes, the brain is engaged in something different when you're walking and talking and thinking and walking and talking. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And, I'm a big kind of cyclist, walker, hiker, so, again, I'm leaning into things that may be a little bit different, but I'm going to pick on them. I'm going to try them. I'm going to see if that's going to work for me and for my team or for my client group. And I'm going to play with that, and I'm going to use that as far as I can, and I'm going to keep mixing it up. Again, I think part of what I have noticed out of my own behaviors is I don't know how to get through this, but I'm going to experiment like I always do. I'm probably going to lean into duality. So I'm going to do one thing for a certain amount of time and then mix it into something else. And that, again, to me, tells me that I'm I'm not 100% sure of the direction for sure, and I haven't dialed it in correctly yet, but I'm going to try to see what these experiments kind of give me and how I can lean into some of that stuff. Again, it's, I've noticed that, during the bad weather, I wanted to cycle inside, but it's really hard to keep cycling inside without anything to feed your mind. So I watch movies and cycle at the same time. I noticed that duality helps me to get through that in a way that actually brings a lot more creativity. And I'm excited to get on the bike every day because I know I'm going to be then connecting it to film and to data because I'm tracking how fast I'm going and so forth. I don't know whether that's a behavior that I can keep doing for the next six months, but I'm certainly going to keep on trying, because what I don't want to do is just be stuck. I don't want to feel stuck, and I don't want my team members to feel stuck. And part of getting unstuck is being vulnerable enough to say, this actually isn't working, and I'm not able to do this, and this. So what I'm actually going to do is not only just present you with a problem, I'm going to sort of present you with ways that I've tried to solve this. And as someone who's managed creative teams, I really do give you like the benefit of it being difficult and challenging, and really intrigued by how you've gone about solving it, because that's why we brought you into the team in the first place.
Excellent point. By the way, you got a shout out from Kate on the East Coast saying, "I love that idea." So who doesn't love going for a walking meeting, and these, and we talked about this idea of a new routine, right? And everyone has come up with a new routine since this pandemic. We've had no choice. But now we're going back, and we're going to have to update that routine again. There is a question, and maybe Dom or Irene, you want to take this. It's from Jonathan. It's as you think ahead to the after times. I like the way you put that, the after times. What mix of in-office and remote work do you anticipate? And this might feel like we know the answer, but I think a lot of us are still wondering. Anyone want to just take it, Dom? Go for it.
That is the $64,000 question, right? I love Dan's concept of duality, and what embodies duality better than the button-down collar shirt and the sweatpants. There is that kind of baked in essence of duality. We don't know what the mix of in-person and remote will be, but there are two things that I am very, very aware of. Number one, as business owners, as employers, as leaders, we have a great opportunity to tap into amazing resources that we didn't have to, because someone can be 100% remote and be effective and be engaged and be part of the team. We've proven that use case. So now if there's a great designer in India or in Turkey or in the UK or in Brazil, that doesn't necessarily take them off the plate in terms of being part of our team. That also raises the question of bias. And I know bias for a lot of educators, a lot of designers, is something that we have to recognize, that we have to work with, that we have to struggle to overcome. And because there is that duality, or the potential for that duality, we have to be keenly aware of the biases that we bring to work, that we have with our coworkers. If somebody is not in the office, that doesn't mean that they're working any less hard. If somebody doesn't want their camera on, that doesn't mean that they're any less valuable or effective. There's always going to be, when these choices are given, we have to back it up with an understanding of the potential for bias, the potential for dichotomy. We have seen this digital divide growing over the past 20 years between the haves and the have-nots, those that have access to the digital resources to interact with this new world. So when we talk about biases, when we talk about return to work, how far are we willing to go to create that new environment where my coworker that lives on a farm or in a rural community and has slow internet has the same choices as the coworker that lives in the metropolitan center that has all the options for connectivity, et cetera. So I think we are making it up as we go along. To answer Jonathan's question very succinctly, we are very much going to listen to the people that we work with, to our clients, to our colleagues, to figure out what works for them. Because the other thing that the pandemic has allowed us to glimpse in a little bit more detail is the fact that people's lives, their kids, if I have to bail out of a meeting to go get my shot, well, go get your shot. That is orders of magnitude more important than the client meeting. So, balancing those types of things are going to be the key to going back. Do you feel comfortable? Do you have the resources? If you don't, what can I do to help?
Great point. Does anyone have any comments on that? Because this is, Dan's business is very different to Dom's business, let's just say. And remote has been here for such a long time and we've embraced it, but now everyone's in it. So it's different when we all relate to what it's like to be a remote worker now. And your point on bias is very clear, distance bias essentially. And you could say that remote working is probably easier than hybrid working because we don't know yet what hybrid working is going to be like. And that's something that we'll have to tackle. Creatively, it is more of a challenge too with collaborating with teams. We know that. So the future is going to be really interesting. In terms of education, I know, students of the future and skills, Irene, you talked about soft skills. They're very adaptable group of people. I think it's just more around the anxiety, the use of the technologies that we've been engaged in. The minute that we get together in a space, things will change, so then they'll be exposed to new ways of communicating, the intentionality of, a firm and protocols that Robin was touching upon too. And I think these are all things that we're going to design in the next coming year. Do you have any thoughts on that, Irene, as somebody who's teaching this next group, what those skills for, let's say, 2022 look like?
Do you mean like the technical skills or?
No, I think more just the human skills, because we know that we're surrounded by the introverts, the introverted extroverts, and the extroverted, so there's a real duality actually in the personalities too, and the comfort in not having video on, for instance. And maybe that just comes down to practice too.
Sure.
Getting into where you can actually put it into practice, but.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly, I think to build upon a comment Dom said earlier about intentionality, right? I think that's one of the things when a student is, preparing themselves for the professional world, or like how do they interact with people and communicate with them. I think there needs to be an awareness of being more intentional about their actions, right? And how they, I guess how they communicate with people, how they interact with them, particularly collaboration. I mean, collaboration was already something in my classroom pre-pandemic, but I have found myself in the remote world, again, having to be more deliberate about it because you lose all those cues. You're forced to only interact through one channel, which is, online. And I think students organically find their ways to do that. Like, for example, one of the popular tools they use, and it's more, I think it's socially popular, but it's definitely not an academic or a professional tool, is Discord, right? Discord came out of the gaming world. At its baseline, it is a chat function and has video function, but it was designed in a way originally for gamers to interact and communicate, but now it's kind of blown into and caught on to any other kind of social group or connection community uses it. Like even in Canada now, the biggest is it vaccine hunters. There's sort of the strongest voice, like sort of a group of people who got together and just said, hey, we're going to help everyone across the country. All they do is direct communication and help people navigate the complex system of how to find a vaccine shot in their local area, right? And their main platform to connect with the community across the entire country is through Discord, right? So so I think it's about the soft skills that students need to, I think is important for them is one, knowing how to be intentional. Two, how do they present and convey themselves in the online world, right? I know my thoughts are, this is just my personal opinion, but I go, I'm an introvert naturally myself, right? But I've recognized just, you know, over my career and my experiences that even there was always moments where you had to be intentional about it. So I guide them in saying, okay, when you need to meet somebody the first time, you're the generation who is going to be known as starting your careers in the online world, right? They are doing their internships, they are doing their first jobs, they have never met their colleagues. And I asked a few of them, how do you know, how is it? And it's a mixed bag. Some of them will say, well, it's good with the people I interact with, but it's really hard that I don't get to know people. So they were, when they do get the chance to connect with people, outside of their immediate team, it's really, really rewarding. And it's a little bit, I think, of, again, other folks being intentional about, hey, there's a new person here, let me reach out to them and have a 30-minute virtual coffee with them, right? And them also knowing, hey, maybe give them permission to say, hey, maybe reach out to people, this is how you can do it, or these are the people you can, I recommend you reach out to speak with. So it's about the intentionality. It's about that, whether it's a face-to-face connection or some sort of connection in some way. That's what I think what will be important for them as one of their soft skills to navigate the remote world.
Excellent. Great point. I didn't want this to, our time is soon approaching the end, which is hard to believe, but I didn't want this to go without the conversation around ecology. And Dom, I know this is of interest to you, and we've heard about large organizations and businesses and investments being focused on ESG and the effect about, you know, environment, social governance, but also just in terms of move towards circularity. And as designers and creatives, we have a lot of influence to kind of move this along. What are your thoughts on how you might sort of tackle these issues with your business?
I think you can't get away from it. I look out my window and I see the difference with the way that the natural world around me has changed over the past year. There are more animals. I'm noticing them. I track this cardinal that lives in a tree outside my my home office here. We have an opportunity to change the conversation, to impact the conversation. Like Dan was saying, hopping on a plane to go see someone isn't really a viable option for many of us. The upside of that is there's an ecological impact to it. There's also a social impact to being intentional in how we build our organizations, how we do our work, in that we can be more open to engaging with people that we haven't necessarily engaged with before, and the opportunity for that type of social impact is really one that we can't let pass us by. And thirdly, I think from a mental health standpoint, we have felt the toll that the last 18, 16 months have taken on people. We've seen it, we've all seen it, we've all felt it. And so we are now more aware of the responsibility that we have in terms of ensuring that we're healthy. It's not unusual as part of a benefits package to have a gym membership, or to be able to have your benefits cover your yoga classes or your massages. Now we know that potentially counseling or other types of mental health resources should be part of that whole concept of wellness. And so I think we are slowly opening our eyes to the things that can be changed, and the ability of our work habits to impact the world for the better, ecologically and socially also.
That's great to hear. And this can also be part of, Robin was touching upon protocols too, as we get back to the office and business, and how it is we begin to design, how it is that we take on projects, why we take on projects, and the types of clients we work with and we don't work with also can be part of, our future. Lauren, there are a couple of questions. I think we've answered them, but do you want to just let me know what they are? Just turn your mic on.
Sure. So Afnan asks, as we all know, during this pandemic, most of medical facilities around the world are busier than ever. My question is, in what way could a designer help medical personnel in order to lighten their jobs and tasks?
We're actually working on a project with a client in the healthcare space right now. We're looking exactly at that question. What can we change for nurses in terms of some of the things that they do? We're doing some ethnographic research in some healthcare units across the United States to see in terms of sanitation, in terms of privacy, in terms of task automation, those types of things. And a lot of it is due to the pandemic, due to the fact that there is a heightened need to do sanitation or sanitization, I should say, of equipment, and the sharing of equipment isn't necessarily as prevalent as before. So now we have to look for efficiencies, and so I think there is a lot that we can do for the healthcare space. In terms of design, we see more opportunities for telehealth, for remote health applications, and that can have the domino effect in the social space, because there are many communities that are struggling with attracting doctors, nurses, dentists, etc. And we have the opportunity now, and there's the will and there's the money to address some of those things with some of the solutions that we're potentially coming up with for everyone else.
Great, Tom, thanks. There is a question here that it's rather lengthy, but thank you, Peter, for posting it. It's about synchronization signals will support cohesion. So like arriving at a meeting room at the same time is a form of synchronization. How do we move beyond Zoom or Teams platforms to create more private virtual places to engage in deeper synchronization while maintaining personal spaces where connections can be built? That's sort of the beginning of the question.
Can I respond to that? And maybe I could give an education example, because in the teaching I have found online to be a real struggle from the teacher's perspective, right? And it's just no replacement for being in a classroom, and that makes intuitive sense, right? So one of the things that I just had to do out of necessity was introduce another platform. The existing organizational academic platform that's provided by the university was just insufficient in the ways that had to be more compassionate, to steal Dom's perspective here, to be more compassionate with the student situation. So what I did was I introduced a community platform, which we use in tandem with the other, right? So all of the critical stuff gets on the grading platform, et cetera. But in the community platform, there's lots of visual material. There's it's set up, it's designed for communication between each other and commenting on each other's work. The transparency of being able to see what's in front of you and what's in front of everybody else, what's inside each other's minds, and all this type of stuff. So it's a real nurturing space, right? And I think it appeals to sort of a more of a well-being kind of approach, you know? And one of the things that Dom was talking about in the healthcare space, my hope would be that the mental health issues of the nurses, the support that everybody needs is in place, and not just nurses, but I mean, everybody. I think we've all felt the pressure, anxiety, and so on. And some of us bury it, and some of us, you know, expose it, but I mean, it's there, right? And so I think the mental health support issue, I hope, comes further to the foreground than in the past, because I think it's a real issue.
Great. We are unfortunately at 1 o'clock. Apparently we need more time to tackle this subject. Does anyone else in a minute want to reply to that, or are we feeling pretty good? Because I know meetings occur back to back these days. Okay. I'd like to thank our panelists. And by the way, Irene, there's a question for you from Justin that is going to take a bit of time for you to reply to. So if you don't mind, I'll send it to you and then we'll post it with our blog, okay?
Sure.
Just so you know. Anyway, I'd like to thank Irene, Dom, Dan, and Robin. Thank you for being here today, and thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to participate. Thanks to Lauren from Pivot for supporting the webinar design, recording, and setup. Thank you to the audience and for participating and being here today. This event has been recorded, and a version will be available in 2 weeks on the Design Meets website. Let's see what's next for our design practice. What's ahead for the next generation of designers? You know, what will our working roles be like? What are the implications for education and training? You know, how can we get this right? We definitely, with the design practice, we have the opportunity to, you know, to test things, to iterate, to take action, and sort of create the world, post-pandemic world that we want to see. This is the great thing about being in the area that we are in as designers and creatives. So I look forward to the next 6 months. But thank you again, and to be continued. Thanks all.